Welcome to another program in the series Medicine and Society. We have two wonderful guests today to address a very significant topic. This is Dr. Jessica Schorr Saxe from Carolinas Medical Center at Biddle Point. She's a family physician. And Dr. Ann Walker from Presbyterian Novant and in Walker Pediatrics. And our topic for today is a very, very important one in our society, childhood obesity. And we've sort of saying that it is a problem that needs to be addressed by physicians, parents, and the community. All right, so let me sort of set the stage for the discussion, and then we can go forward, okay? All three of us are mothers. We happen to be parents as well as professionals. And we believe that, when we have our babies, they're born with such a potential to live long and happy and healthy lives. And yet what we see in our society is this increasing problem of childhood obesity, which in many cases is going to result in adult obesity. And with that will come tons of chronic diseases, diabetes, heart conditions, sleep apnea, all of these awful things we wouldn't want to visit on our own kids or anyone else's kids. And yet somehow as a society, we talk a lot about it, but we don't seem to be able to do all that much about it. I mean, some progress is being made, but not that much. So I would like each of you to sort of look at the problem. And what I mean by the problem is, for you, Dr. Walker, and I want you to basically say, why do some physicians or healthcare professionals have such a difficult time addressing the problem of obesity or childhood obesity, I suppose with parents in particular? And then I want you, Jessica, because I've heard you speak on this topic many times, to focus on why community and society in general have such a hard time coming to terms with the problem of obesity, maybe not only childhood but adult. So, Ann, why don't you start out? Why do physicians have a hard time doing this?
I think there are a lot of obstacles to getting time and opportunity to help families look at nutrition from a preventative point of view, or even from a treating point of view. When I was in medical school, nutrition was probably the least favorite topic of most of us. And now it's one of my favorites. And what I think is amazing right now is that we're at a turning point where, due to good control of a lot of illnesses through vaccinations, we're able to have the time to talk about lifestyle and nutrition, and these are the things that are going to create the illnesses of the future. So I'm hoping that we're at a point where we are going to begin to make a lot of headway. There's a lot of reluctance of a physician to give bad news. That's one thing we don't do very well. And so when we are called upon to criticize the way a child is growing, we do that at our peril because we're paid for by the parents and they want us to praise their children. And so there's an emotional obstacle, a reluctance to talk about things, which is why I think it's so essential that we work at it from a preventative point of view. And we try to approach in our office nutrition as something everyone should do. So we tell everyone, tall and short, fat and thin, everybody needs to pursue good nutrition.
Do parents sometimes feel like you're blaming them?
Well, a little bit. I think that, as we'll see in our conversation, there's a lot of sort of background things that will help children get into an overeating mode. Too much spectatorship and too much inactive time, too much time in front of a screen. And so it may be a little bit of that, and I think sometimes that's a refuge that parents can take, but I think everyone's a little sensitive when you see that a child is growing way out of control and the parents have not been successful in enabling to get those brakes put on that child's growing.
Jessica, would you please expand on that from different perspectives?
From the point of view of the community. The reason that I think that it's difficult for the community to get engaged around this is because I think our perception is that it's an individual issue of personal responsibility. and that's how people tend to look at problems like overweight in children. That if you know an adult or a child who's either overweight or has an issue with it, I think people's response is that that person or that child's mother needs to, always responsible,
Always the mother,
always
yeah.
responsible. Fathers too, but need to be making some individual decisions about what food choices they make and how active they are, and that's where the solution is. In fact, what we have now is a public health problem. 2/3 of American adults are either overweight or obese, and almost 1/3 of children are either overweight or obese. And the real solution is not going to be in people making decisions one by one. It's what we do in the community. And we have some models for that, and we know some things that work. We know that if you live in a community where it's easier to walk and to bike, we know that people are more active in those communities, and that they're more likely to walk to school or bike to school, and that you can increase activity in the way that you structure a community. We know that if people have healthy foods accessible to them, they're more likely to eat healthy foods. And we also know that if communities have campaigns to decrease screen time, which is the third part of the equation that people sometimes forget about, we know that that actually can do that. It can have that effect and it can actually have an impact of the weight on children. So one factor is that I think people don't understand that the solution is really in community solutions and not personal responsibility. The other answer to that question is that I think that people are fatalistic and they don't realize they can have an impact. They kind of say, well, this is our society, this is how people eat, we can't do anything about that.
Yeah, I have a question to ask both of you just on that one point. When you say it's a community problem in terms of these factors about, is there a ability to walk and bicycle paths and all that type of thing, and are these healthy foods available, and are they available to rich as well as poor people, and those types of issues, and then you have the screen time. How well does North Carolina and Charlotte stand in this kind of milieu?
Hot off the press.
Hot off the press, I love it already.
I thought that we were 5th worst in terms of childhood obesity, but somebody told me today that we've moved into position 4. That we had the 4th highest rate of childhood obesity.
And I know South Carolina is
up there too.
And do you know which is the worst state?
I think it's one of those. Thank goodness for Mississippi.
Yeah, Mississippi,
and maybe West Virginia is high too. But I hope I'm not maligning West Virginia.
No, but it's interesting how the problem or whatever seems to be localized, because for a while I lived out west, and it seemed to me just because of the lifestyle in the West, things were very much different than in the South. So we'll get to that some more. I was reading an article in New York Times a couple of weeks ago, and I couldn't resist bringing along the whole quote to see what both of you would think. And the article was entitled, "Born Round, The Secret History of a Full-Time Eater." And actually it's from a food critic who spends his living, even now, tasting a lot of delicious foods. And the title of his article was "Eat Your Peas or Don't, Whatever." It sort of sounds like the fatalistic thing with, the parents, and they go, "Eat your peas, okay, don't, all right, whatever." I'm not having much success. So here's the quote. "The boy sneaks food. I've seen him. His appetite is formidable, and he knowingly eats more than he should or must, to the steady concern and occasional consternation of his parents. Sometimes they keep count. How many pretzels? Sometimes they vainly suggest an apple instead. Often they look away, not wanting to aggravate an eating-related anxiety that they can already sense in him on the cusp of adolescence." Then he says, "Well, the girl treats food warily. Edging into adulthood, she worries what too many French fries, what any French fries could do to her and monitors her waistline, even though her parents haven't told her, you know, she should be doing so. Does she monitor it too closely and joylessly? You know, is she getting into some issue here? Can parents prevent that? They wonder, so do I. Neither of these children, and he's interacted with both of these kids, comes close to being a statistic or case study. The boy really isn't obese, and the girl isn't anorexic or anything resembling that. But he says they represent a larger group of younger people between those wide extremes, obese, anorexic, or whatever you want to say. And they speak to a subtle parental challenge. How to coach children away from unhealthy eating without sowing panic. How to make them conscious of their intake without making them too self-conscious about its consequences. So he's basically saying, look, it's a really difficult balancing act that parents have to undertake. On the one hand, they want children to be healthy eaters. On the other hand, they don't want children to start obsessing about food so that they get into some sort of eating disorder or something like that. So with that, it's a little bit of a stage setting. And how should parents handle this?
Well, I have to sort of preface what I'm about to say because I'm a very strict mom. And I don't mind giving my children feedback. And I think we've lost the ability to say no. We've lost the ability to say, that's not working for you. We've lost the ability to criticize and still hold up that child's self-esteem. So to dodge the bullet, if you will, of criticizing your child when they are overeating or they're eating too many times during the day, you're actually dooming them to some future anxieties as an unhappy, overweight adolescent, or indeed, on the other end of the things, a child stuck in an eating disorder. I really favor sort of recommending to my families that we compartmentalize eating. Eating doesn't need to be done nonstop. Some of the most obese children that we see are what we call chain eaters. They're like chain smokers. They come home from school and they get the big snack that hasn't been planned in advance, and every time they return to the kitchen to put the plate or the bowl up, something else goes into that plate or bowl. I met a Japanese lady the other day who doesn't allow her children to stick their hands into a bag of cookies or crackers. She's handing out snacks, and these are middle school students, which really encouraged me because that's how I do my snacks at home. We plan them. So to reduce eating opportunities, when you're eating, eat, and when you're playing, play. But don't eat while you play. So when we would go out for a snow date and I would have some snacks in my pocket of my vest thinking I don't want to undress these children and get them back into the house again, what's wrong with just playing till we're flat out done and then going inside and having our lunch? And so I had an epiphany one day with exactly that scenario and realized that it would be a great idea if we could just figure out when we're supposed to eat more family meals, eat more slow food, you know, cooked together at home as a family, which the rest of the world seems to do pretty well. But also to pick out times when we're not going to be eating. We're not going to be eating while we do our homework. We're not going to be eating while we're in front of a television, and certainly you don't want to mess up your keyboard, so not on the computer. Another great new trick, because everybody's heard that one, is don't eat in the car. When you're in the car, you're traveling somewhere. You should be looking for, your children should be looking for ambulances and fire trucks. They don't need to be snacking in the car. And I was horrified when my children's booster seats came with dual cup holders, you know, one for the, pardon my branding, but one for the Dr. Pepper and one for the Doritos. You know, that's not working for our kids. And on a long trip, sure, you might have a bottle of water, but it's really not just good for your car, but it's good for your kids to not be thinking that I should be entertaining myself by eating out of habit or boredom.
You want to add something to that, Jessica?
Sure. I have to say I found this somewhat of a dilemma as a parent, more difficult really than I thought that it was going to be. Going into, I may not be the only parent in the world who went into parenthood being a little naive, but I thought that all that I had to do was what I'd read in books, which was offer my kids an array of healthy foods, and that those would be their choices, and then that would be the end of it. The problem that I see with that, and that is still what I recommend to parents, the problem is that there's a big world outside there, and you only have so much control. And
less than we think.
Always less than we, about any subject, always less than we thought we were going to have for sure. But, you know, we could have healthy foods in our house, and what I tried to do was to be healthy, but not so strict, because for exactly the kind of situation that you described in that article, I didn't want my kids to get into something where they just craved sweets. And one of the stories, before I had my daughter, I heard from 3 different people that they had not allowed their children to have any sugar at all, and then the first time they saw candy, they went so crazy that it was embarrassing. Yeah. So I didn't want to be all the way to that extreme. But what I've found is that kids go out in the world, and in the world there are a lot of pressures, and there are lots of snack foods at other people's houses and lots of fast food that other people are taking them to, and that was the world that they were in. So I think one of the issues for parents is just that kind of individual issue of maintaining the balance. The other thing that I would say that I think is a parental issue is, again, for parents to be involved in affecting policies about food. Because you can go to your kid's school or daycare and say, you know, let's have some sense here, and let's have some policies about what people are allowed to bring in for parties, and you know, what the school cafeteria serves and things like that. And I think that's a really important role for parents, is to be advocates for good nutrition and for enough physical activity.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the schools themselves take enough initiative?
Well, currently in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, you get 1% skim milk. So even the chocolate milk or the strawberry milk is low fat. And there are healthy choices available. My children routinely come home and have eaten broccoli or a chef salad or something sort of surprising to me. Yeah. There are also, you know, nachos and other things that maybe aren't always the best choice. But, you know, I think that taking that balance is so important, because then they're not, we tell everybody, if you have a weak point, eat it once a week. You know, if you have something that you really, really love, but just don't do that every day. But I've been very, very impressed with our school menus in working hard to try to do that. A lot of daycares are also working together locally with some of the chefs from Johnson & Wales to try to work out sort of training for the cafeterias and the daycares to get their you know, calorie counts down, and to have snack water instead of juice. All these good changes have started happening.
Right. I really wanted to ask another question. Is I asked about states, and we did do that well as the states. But why are some other countries so good at handling the problem of obesity, whereas other countries aren't? Is it lifestyle? Is it their food industries? Is it their, you know, governments? What do you think, Jessica?
Well, I would really like to speak to that, because I've, first of all, when I've traveled, I mean, when you travel, you notice that there are lots of countries where there just isn't the amount of overweight and obesity that we have. But one example, speaking to lifestyle, is 3 years ago when my son was in the 8th grade, he went on a school trip to France, and he came back, and unprompted, he just said, they're not as fat there because they walk everywhere. And he noticed he had a home stay with a family, and he was going back and forth to school. They walked to the store. So there are many things about the lifestyle. Another part of the lifestyle is, I think, that they don't eat all day long, like Ann was describing. I think in other countries, many places, people still cook and they eat meals together, and you eat at mealtime. And I think that they probably enjoy their food more, not eating continuously, but having a real ritual of meals.
And there's portion control. I was just came back from the Netherlands. I thought it was quite a funny experience. Several months ago, I was walking across the street. I was hit by a car. My legs were broken, and so on and so forth. And I went to this conference, nevertheless. And what was interesting about it. At one point, they said, now we're going to go out to this restaurant tonight, and it was 8 miles away, and we're all going to go on bicycles. I raised my hand, no, I'm not going on a bicycle. But the notion was that that was very typical in the Netherlands. Everybody was on bicycles, and they thought that was a very routine thing to do. And the only reason they wouldn't do it is if it was going to rain or something. And then we went to a restaurant, and the food was delicious, and we had this wonderful ice cream at dessert, but all the portions were, you know, very controlled. And I was just thinking of the difference in the style of portion and exercise and so on. And do you want to add on, what do you think, the food industry? Or?
I'd like to add something to it too. I don't know if you...
Yeah, go.
Oh, I just want to add one thing while we're on the thought, which is lifestyle and choices are part of it, but I think we also ought to realize that policies are a part of it, and that our healthcare system is a part of it also, because right now the incentives in healthcare are to treat sick people. Like, as a doctor, if I have a patient, they come in and they're sick, you know, I get paid for seeing them because they're sick. If I do a procedure, I get paid for that. If they get hospitalized, somebody gets paid for that. And there's no incentive to keep people well. But some of the things, for instance, that are being talked about in health care reform are about incenting practices to have a defined group of patients and to be more rewarded if they keep their patients well. And I think if those were our incentives, I think that we'd be doing more lifestyle counseling with our patients, and I think there would be a lot more creativity coming out about how practices can link to resources in the community and keep people healthy. So I think that's also a factor.
Point.
Yeah. I think around the world there's so many countries where preventative care does intervene when it's a small problem. You know, and it doesn't take a whole lot of advice to steer somebody just off of, let's say for me, I'm talking to a family with a 4-month-old who's getting up twice a night to eat. They don't need to eat after 14 pounds. You should be able to make 10 hours nonstop sleep. And I have great success in getting that to happen, but the key is to stop and think about that ahead of time. Again, that goes back to that decreasing eating opportunities, to identify a child who's 20% or 30% overweight before they become obese, and say, you know, let's tap the brakes, let's turn the tide, let's make things happen that don't require a whole lot of work. Yeah. And that's, you know, again, so many countries, again, where lifestyle is a worry about what's going to happen as all the new cars come out in China, because China's been a bicycling nation, you know, and what will happen. But so many places where cars are not readily available and for where people walk, we do see the whole population just looks fairly lean and fit.
Yeah. You know, as we're sort of getting to the time we might have to stop this conversation, I was just wondering if I could personalize things a bit. And what was one of the hardest cases you had working through with a patient?
You know, your heart gets broken every day, and I'm always thinking that, you know, we can fix everything. I met a young lady one time. She was an 80-pound 4-year-old, which is pretty big, so an 80-pound 4-year-old. And by the time she was 8, she was 136 pounds. And what we found out when we stopped to talk about her nutritional situation, the family was divorced. The grandmother, who was a very overweight lady, had the child after school every day. And the thing that started her chain eating for the afternoon was that her snack every day was a medium frozen pizza. So we're now looking at, she starts with maybe 1,500 calories. And again, the trips began back and forth to the kitchen. And it really took getting that child out of that home. She moved to another state to live with her father. He got her involved in some activities, so I never could help her while she was still in that environment. And it is heartbreaking to see adults letting a child slide down that slope. And the self-esteem issues, the way this young lady felt about herself when she finally got partially recovered. She was, you know, at age 8 wearing a woman's size 14 clothing, and came back, and 6 months later we had her in a 10, and we moved further. And to my knowledge, you know, she became a success story, but a heartbreak because we couldn't get the adults around her to recognize that they were wanting to share their problem with this girl.
Jessica, do you think you could just very briefly give us one of your success stories?
Sure, I get the fun question.
Yeah, I was kind of mean to that. I thought someone had to have the gathering.
In the spring, I saw a girl who's a teenager, who's very overweight, well over 200 pounds. And she said she wanted to lose weight. She gets teased at school. A lot of these overweight, despite how prevalent overweight is, a lot of these kids I've heard get teased in a really mean fashion. She was tired of that. Her mother is also very overweight, and so I didn't really think anything necessarily was going to improve. But I talked to her some about nutrition and exercise, and then I also referred her to our great school nutritionist who saw her at her school and worked with her. And I just got a note from the nutritionist that over the summer she lost 12 pounds. She's found a way to exercise, she's biking, she's making better food choices, and I'm just so happy for her.
Yeah, that sounds like a real success story. Now, if you only had one thing you wanted our audience to hear, what would it be, Anne, about this problem in 1 minute?
Oh, I can do a couple of things in 1 minute.
Okay.
I think that it's very important to realize the value of sugar-free products. We have lots of diabetic children who are little, and they handle those foods very well, so that NutraSweet, which is the blue, and Splenda, which is the yellow, are safe for children. Getting the sugar out of children's lives is a huge way to drop calories. Had a young man who was drinking 3 regular Cokes a day. He went to Diet Coke and lost 12 pounds in 12 weeks. That's exactly how many calories are in those soft drinks. So say goodbye to sugar and juice as much as you can. Watch your dairy fat. Milk is so wholesome, we don't tend to think that 2% in whole milk are bad milks, but after age 2, we want children to be on skim or 1% milk. So drop your dairy fat. Drop your eating opportunities. And I think that starting early, watching, we look at children's body mass index. By the time a child is age 3, I'm already starting to forecast what kind of body style they'll have. Look at it early, treat it when it's just starting, and treat it with the parents feeling enabled and powerful to just make small turnings of how their boat is going and get into another direction, and most people succeed with that.
And you're going to get the last word. So.
Well, what I would do is to encourage everyone to translate the things that Anne has said into community solutions, and advocate for having food policies at your kids' daycare, at your kids' school, in other settings, in your own office setting, where people are encouraged to serve healthy foods and not always have donuts and sweets around, but that there be real policies around that. And advocate for having a community where it really is easy for people to walk, to bike, where it's encouraged, and so on.
Seen as normal.
Where those things are seen as normal. Right. And there are a variety. There are a variety of other policies related that I would just like to have people think in terms of the larger solutions for this problem.
This has been a perfect show, because I think we've actually done what the title of the program said we would do. We've basically showed how families, parents, physicians, and the community all get together, have to collaborate to make this not a really, awful sort of project, but one that's doable and can even be enjoyable in a way, in the way we change your lifestyle. So thank you very, very much for today.